Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 3 of this year's 2021 AtlanTec Festival from the sunny Oranmore in the County Galway. I believe Pat is joining from an equally sunny Barna across the bay. And for those who have joined us already this week, you know that it has been sunny in Galway. I think that's going to change. We probably won't get the Thursday ice creams that we usually have at the AtlanTec Festival. For those of you who joined us already, a very warm welcome back. And those of you who haven't been with us so far, you're very welcome to this year's AtlanTec Festival. So my name is William Johnston. I'm head of production with Trudeau, a digital innovation agency based in Oranmore. And I've had the pleasure of being involved with ITAG for over 10 years and have been heavily involved in AtlanTec since its early beginnings, some 7 years ago now in GMIT. Since we started out as a one-day conference back in 2015, it has been a great pleasure to see the conference grow to a local festival and now taking to a world stage thanks to the current global situation, which shows that there is always a little bit of good in adversity. Over the years, we've hosted many amazing speakers from far and wide, but some of the local talent we have staged has surpassed the international dimension on many occasions, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to be in the same situation today. The AtlanTec Festival would not be possible without you, its audience. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're over 100 in attendance, and I'm sure that you're all going to be 100% in attendance for the full session. The AtlanTec Festival Committee extends its thanks to you. There is a very large group of people who make this happen, and they've worked tirelessly to put on a program of events that I'm sure you do appreciate. And if you haven't signed up for any other events, there are plenty more fantastic events to come this week. It's also worth a special mention to our many sponsors and supporters, without whom the festival would not be possible, and they continue to support us year on year. This morning, it is my extreme pleasure to host this morning's event with Pat Divilly. I've had the pleasure of seeing Pat on a number of occasions, and this is my first time hosting him. And for those of you who haven't seen Pat before, you're in for a really special treat. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end through the Q&A function. There, I'm sure you'll all be able to find it at this stage. Feel free to throw your questions into chat or into Q&A, and we'll field them at the end of the session. The session is being recorded, and we are making all of the content available for this year's AtlanTec Festival on the ITAG YouTube channel later this week. In the meantime, we're really trying to get the word out on social media. So any of the posts you see, please do share, subscribe, take a picture, whatever you need to do, and tag us with the hashtag AtlanTec to help us spread the word. So without too much further ado, let me introduce you to Pat Divilly. Pat is a speaker, coach, and author from Galway, Ireland, who shares a practical approach to emotional and mental fitness. Pat initially got his start in the fitness industry, where his business grew from 5 clients on his local beach to over 20,000 clients globally in a 5-year period. Working with such a wide demographic of people, Pat became more interested in a holistic approach to wellness and went on to study yoga, meditation, breathwork, cognitive behavioral therapy. Thanks for all these big words, Pat. Logotherapy, and many other areas of high performance. He has spoken for some of the world's biggest companies and is passionate about building supportive and healing programs and communities. So I'm going to pass the WebEx ball over to you, Pat, and we will get this party started.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all, or at least see names going up on screens. I would love to get a little bit of engagement in the chat box from the onset, if that's okay with people. So if you can find the chat box, I won't ask too much of you, but could I get a number on a scale of 1 to 10 just to get a feel for how everyone's feeling in terms of energy? 10 would be energies through the roof. 1 would be energies maybe through the floor, and maybe we're somewhere in between. So it'd be lovely to get a bit of engagement. Thank you. Straight off the bat, we've got 10s. We see got 5s, 6s, 8s, 7s. One of the rules should be we're not allowed to say 7 because I think that's where most of our minds go on these 1 to 10. 7.9. That's an award on that one for the most innovative. Brilliant. 8.112. Thank you. Okay, next question. I'm just going to have a couple of quick questions to start. Scale of 1 to 10, how much did you miss the barbershops or the hairdressers over the last couple of months? There's usually a few zeros, usually a few thousands or 10,000s or whatever it might be. Last question for now. Second last question for now. A couple of words, if you can, to describe how the last year has been for you. A couple of words, if you're comfortable sharing how the last year has been for you. And maybe it's a combination of things. I might say it's been overwhelming. It's been a rat race. It's been stuck on a treadmill. I see tough, challenging, anxious, difficult, a pause. I see confusing, nightmare, lots of different words coming through. So thank you for your openness from the onset. Reflective, mixed emotions, nice to spend time with family, up and down, slow down. I think we're all mirrors to one another, so I'm sure you see a part of yourself in other people's shares. Last question, I probably should ask this one from the onset. Where are you located right now? As I try to just get my screen set up. So last question, where are you located? I can see Clare, Galway, Limerick, Bosnia. Lots of different words coming through. See if I can get my text sorted. Lots of Galways, up Galway. And finally, just give me a quick yes if you can see my screen. And then we shall rock and roll. Okay, cool. We're in business. So I'll give you a really quick context. I don't want to take up too much time with this because my challenge with these sessions is always keeping it to an hour. So if I talk about anything today that resonates or is useful for you, I've got a lot of resources online that I'm happy to pass on and that I'd love to share. My passion in life is emotional and mental fitness, and that comes from professional experience and personal experience. I got interested in fitness when I was a young lad. I'm a little bit older now, but it was the first thing in life that really gave me a lot of confidence. And I pursued fitness as a career. And as William mentioned in the intro, I worked with a lot of people in a short period of time. And I suppose I came into fitness naive as a guy in his early 20s that thought fitness was about broccoli and push-ups and helping people get strong and get six packs and everything else. And as I came to work with lots of different people from different demographics, I came to see that sleep was important. I came to see that nutrition obviously was important. But really what I came to see was that mental health was the key. And that stemmed from my own challenges where I always believed that when I achieved certain things in life, I'd achieve happiness. And so I chased a lot of things outside of myself. And I always had a story of I'll be happy when. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. I'll be happy when I start a business. I'll be happy when I have some money in the bank. I'll be happy when I have a house. I'll be happy when I have a car. And I found myself constantly chasing, constantly living in the future. And ultimately, by my late 20s, I'd sort of achieved a lot of the things I was convinced would make me happy. And I woke up with the house and the car and the girlfriend and great friends and family in a business that I really liked. But I felt flat, I felt overwhelmed, I felt anxious, and I was struggling. And I found myself back to psychiatrists and psychologists for the first time in my life, having nothing that I could point to for my challenges. So usually I could say I'm sad or I'm depressed or I'm anxious because, and I'd point my finger at what was wrong in my life. But for the first time, I felt like everything was right, but I still didn't feel good. And that's a huge challenge. I think when you've got something that's gone wrong and you can point to it, you feel like, oh, well, there's a reason I'm sad. But when you've got what you thought you wanted and you still feel a little bit empty, for me at least, that was disconcerting, and it really made me feel like there was something wrong with me. But that was about 6 years ago, and I really started changing my lifestyle at that time. And I started thinking about how I had invested for years in my physical health. I'd looked at physical fitness on a consistent basis, recognizing that physical fitness is what would allow me in the long term to be physically healthy. It doesn't matter how much gym and juice we have in our lives, we will experience health challenges at some point. But the work that we put into our physical fitness on a consistent basis does give us a better chance of dealing with the challenges that will come up. as we get older in life. The health challenges that come up, again, if I've got a base of physical fitness, I've got a better chance of getting through those challenges. But I recognized that with mental health, I had always assumed that mental health was just something that happened. Some days I felt good, other days I felt bad. And I effectively felt like I was rolling the dice. And I never really considered how mental fitness and emotional fitness would come into play, and how important it was that every day I would be investing in these parts of my life, so that I wasn't using hope as a strategy. I wasn't relying on hope, hoping to feel good. I was actually doing things daily for myself. And so I got interested in meditation and journaling and different things that I'll talk about today. That's why I do what I do. My hope is by the end of today's session, there'll be a short 15 to 20 minutes session that you can put into effect every day that allows you to do similar. And maybe you'll modify it and you'll make it different. But really the idea I want to put across today is that self-care needs to be a consistent practice. And self-care is not about just having a bath and lighting a candle. Self-care really is about two things, for me at least. It's about how I talk to myself, how I communicate with myself in my mind. We could be in paradise and have a difficult voice in our head that makes life difficult, or we could be in hell but have a supportive voice in our head that makes it feel like we can get through things. So self-care is how do I talk to myself on a consistent basis? And self-care is also how do I navigate my difficult emotions? So I asked in the intro there, what were some of the emotions you've experienced over the last year? And we saw lots of things coming through, from loneliness to calm to up and down, reflective, mixed emotions, manageable, roller coaster. Lots of different words came through. Isolating, anxiety, and again, self-care to me is how do I deal with myself when these different emotions come up? If I think about friendship, and I think about if I have a friend who's great to be around when they're in good form, but someone I don't want to be around when they're in bad form, I'm not being a very good friend. So if I just desert my friends when they're feeling sad, I'm not being a very good friend. But similarly for ourselves, I think it's easy to be with ourselves when we're productive and we're focused and we're positive and all these things. It can be more difficult to be with ourselves when the opposite is true. So all that being said, I'm going to get straight into it. Hopefully my screen will be visible and everything else. One way you might think about this, I'm going to break health down into 4 areas of health today. So I'm going to talk about physical health briefly. I won't spend too much time on that. Physical, I'm going to talk about mental health, mental fitness. I'm going to talk about emotional fitness. And then I'm going to talk about spiritual fitness. And again, we'll just touch on each of these. We don't have a huge amount of time, but the principles is the key here today. I think of each of these 4 areas of energy being really important parts of my life. And I think about them almost being like bank accounts, that every day I want to put little investments into my bank accounts. I want to do something daily for my physical health. I want to do something daily for my mental health. And my thinking with this bank account analogy is that every day I put a deposit in the bank, I'm building capacity. I'm building a base, if you will. I'm building resilience and setting myself up for the day where things don't go to plan, setting myself up for the rainy day, if you will. So again, if I invest in my mental health on a consistent basis and I do things for myself, there will still be mental health challenges in life. Challenge is an essential part of life. It's always going to be there. When COVID is gone, there'll be something else. When I surpass the current business challenge, there'll be something else. So it's not about trying to avoid challenge. It's how do I set myself up so that I can deal with challenge in the best possible way? How do I become responsive rather than reactive? Again, physical health. A really quick story, maybe to just demonstrate why I think this is so important. I met a young guy here in Galway only a year or 2 ago, and he was doing a project, and the project was about behavioral issues and meditation. He was about 16, 17, had been in all sorts of trouble, him and his friends in school. And so he showed up with a social worker and he said to me, we want to talk to you about this project we've been doing. We've been meditating and exercising every day before school, and it's having an amazing impact on our health. And I was shocked as I looked at this guy, because he had come into the room and he was effing and blinding, and he was rough around the edges. And he reminded me of myself when I was 15, 16. And when he talked about meditation, I was kind of taken aback. I said, wow, this kid is only 16 and he's meditating, and he's come from causing all sorts of trouble to being in a good place. And I asked him, how is the meditation practice? And he looked at me, and there's a great honesty with teenagers. He said, it's a beautiful practice. And I was taken aback by that. And I left really inspired, and I thought, wow, it's amazing that like things are starting to change and people are starting to embrace some of these ideas. And I wish I'd had it when I was a teenager. But the thing that really struck me was when he meditates, he shows up in a certain way in school. But equally, the day he stops doing those things, he's going to go back to where he was before. And I thought about it in the context of my own life, where there's things that I do that really help me stay well, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But then when I stop doing them, I drift back to where I was before. there's the idea of a crisis meditator. And a crisis meditator is the person who waits until the crisis and then tries to meditate. Effectively, they don't put any deposits in any of these bank accounts, or they skip over some of these bank accounts. Then the crisis comes. There's nothing to draw from when we come to the bank account. Just give me a quick acknowledgement of some kind in the chat box, if that makes sense. So again, we want to set ourselves up. We want to invest daily. We don't want to be the person who's in crisis and then trying to sit with crossed legs and trying to meditate at the worst possible time. We want to set ourselves up in a way that we're ready. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. Let's get into a few different concepts on this. The big thing I'd love to put across, again, there's a couple of principles, and I'll kind of round them out at the end just to make sure that I've hopefully made sense of some of these ideas. Our energy, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, a lot of it's governed by our central nervous system. So our central nervous system will affect our mood, our sleep, our recovery, how we react or respond to the world. So CNS, central nervous system. And at its core, we can break the central nervous system down into two main aspects. You have to excuse my spelling. Sympathetic, and parasympathetic. Okay, so the central nervous system, two main aspects, sympathetic and parasympathetic. These are more commonly known as sympathetic fight or flight response. Okay, fight or flight. We've probably all heard of this, the stress response, so fight or flight response. And the other part of the nervous system, maybe less spoken about, is rest and digest. Rest and digest. Okay, so two aspects of the nervous system, fight or flight, rest and digest. Both serve a purpose. Both are really important, really useful. So the stress response is useful. The sympathetic fight or flight response is useful because it gets us up in the morning, gets us moving, helps us hit deadlines, keeps us safe from danger. That's probably the most important thing. If we walk out into our front garden, our front estate, if we live in an estate, and a car pulls out in front of us, it's the fight or flight response that gives us a surge of energy that allows us to jump out of the way of the car. So really useful. A question there about spiritual health. I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So the fight or flight response, again, it's what gets us out of bed in the morning, helps us hit deadlines, helps us stay safe, helps us stay out of danger, and physically keeps us safe. If we think back to our caveman, cavewoman days, fight or flight response was there, again, to keep us safe. So if a tiger comes into camp, we get this stress response, and the only thing that matters in that moment is survival. So all that matters is survival. I'm going to fight the tiger or I'm going to run away. Nothing else matters. Recovery doesn't matter. Sleep doesn't matter. Digestion doesn't matter. Relaxation doesn't matter. Reproduction doesn't matter. None of those things matter. All that matters is survival. And so the body becomes flooded with stress hormones and chemicals. We get filled with energy and we just try to survive. Why that's relevant is we don't have tigers today walking around Galway or Sligo or any of the places where we are. But our stressful thoughts have the same response for us. And a lot of the way that we are set up in our current environment has the same response for us. So again, drinking lots of caffeine puts us in a stress response. Not sleeping puts us in a stress response. Too much screen time puts us in a stress response. So why I say this is our caveman ancestors, cavewoman ancestors, will have had a short period of fight or flight. So tiger comes to attack. They get a short case of fight or flight response. Stress floods the body. And then when they get to safety, as soon as they get to safety, they switch across and they go into rest and digest. Rest and digest is where the person knows I'm safe now again. I can recover. I can relax. I can sleep. I can chill out. I can go to digest my food. I can reproduce. And if I'm stressed all the time, my body doesn't want to reproduce because I don't want to bring a child into a stressful world. And so back in the day, we went between these two. Short periods of stress to keep us safe, and then we went into rest and digest. Now, why this matters is modern day, we're experiencing chronic stress. We're spending a huge amount of time in this sympathetic part of the nervous system, constantly in a state of fight or flight. Hopefully this is making sense thus far. So again, so much of our environment is set up, so much of our thinking tends to be in the future, worried about what's coming next, or in the past, thinking about what's happened in the past, rumination and anxious thoughts about the future. And so if I'm always in this stress response, I'm always in a state of survival, and it's very hard to thrive. It's very hard to think about my future and to plan and to make great decisions and to be responsive because I find myself reactive to life all the time. One or two more ways we can think about this is fight or flight response, again, is really useful because it gets us up and gets us moving. And so it's like having our foot on the accelerator of a car. Okay, my foot on the accelerator of a car. Now, the problem with having my foot on the accelerator of the car is if it's always there, the car gets faster and faster. And the faster the car gets, the more out of control it starts to feel, until eventually I end up crashing the car. And so that's why we have the brake on the car. I put my foot on the brake, everything slows down a little bit. I come back into control and I can steer again. I can steer directions. Now, think about that in the context of our own lives. The more stressful things get in life, we've all had the experience maybe of having a few drinks on Key Street, waking up the next day, not feeling the best. And small things become big things. Small stresses become big stresses. Or maybe you've got a new child in the house and you're not sleeping very well. And suddenly, small things that usually wouldn't be an issue feel overwhelming. Okay. So, again, the foot is constantly on the accelerator. Everything just becomes that bit more difficult. And eventually, hopefully, we don't get to that point, but we see it all around us. People end up getting burnt out or crashing in some capacity. And so, my big encouragement today is how do we start looking at putting our foot on the brake on a consistent basis? How do we slow down the car? In other words, how do we slow down the body and the mind on a daily basis? What we want to do through these practices is send a signal to our body and our minds on a consistent basis, not when things get bad, but on a consistent basis every day, putting little pockets of time into our day every day where we remind our body, reminds our mind that we're safe, we're okay, we're not under threat, we're not in survival, and we can do all these other things that we need to do. We can digest our food, we can sleep well, we can relax, etc., etc. Okay, so that being said, one or two more ways of looking at this before we get into the practicalities. In life, I can be reactive or I can be responsive. Reactive or responsive. Reactions are where things happen and I don't take a breath to think about my response. I just react in the moment. Okay, so we think about an animal. If you throw a ball, a dog will run after a ball. They don't stop and pause and think about how does this tie in with the rest of my day? What am I going to do next? Does this support me in my endeavors in life? They just react. Similarly, as humans, maybe we get some criticism, constructive criticism from someone, and we don't take a breath and take the criticism on board because we feel under threat. We feel in survival mode straight away. And so we react, we fight back, we fight for our position. And so when we live in reactions, we tend to live on our past habits. Okay, past habits. When we can move to be more responsive, we start to think about our future. What do we want in our future? So again, I will have seen this in the fitness industry for years where a client might join the gym, and for them to create the changes they wanted to create, they'd have to form new habits. Now, they might have great intentions at home, or so they might have great intentions when they came to the gym, but then when they get home, if they fell into that old stress state, if things got very stressful at home, things would get faster and faster and faster. And again, the more stress, the more overwhelmed we get, the more we tend to go back to our past habits. We go back to our reactions. We forget that there's a space between what happens and how we respond to what happens. So you can think about it if you were to, let's keep drawing for now. If I wake up in the morning and my day starts with a lot of social media and a lot of coffee and a lot of listening to fear-based media, I wake up and I've done a couple of things there that have put me into a state where I'm feeling quite stressed. I'm feeling a lot of this foot on the accelerator. The coffee's making me feel more switched on. Too much coffee, I'm not feeling hydrated. I'm feeling wired, fired. The media is making me feel scared about the future, and I'm living in the future trying to plan what's next. Social media has me comparing my life to other people's lives. There's a lot that's happened in those couple of things in the morning. So again, I check my phone in my bed and straight away I'm into other people's lives. What happens in those moments is we start to distort how we see the world. So it's like putting on a pair of Bono's sunglasses and put on this pair of sunglasses with stressing my body and my mind. And I go out into the world and I look out into the world and suddenly everything looks red. The things that usually wouldn't be stressful now seem stressful. The things that people say to me suddenly have a different effect to how they usually would. So I'm reactive to the world. Now, if we were to flip that on its head, and rather than social media, rather than listening to fear-based media, rather than drinking too much coffee, and I love coffee, so I'm not knocking on coffee, we'll talk about what that looks like. If I can make some slightly different changes in the morning, and I can set myself up slightly different in the morning, and I can recognize that I'm the projector. It's like a projector in a movie theater. If there's dust on the projector, it doesn't matter what film you put on the projector, you're going to see the dust up on the screen. Similarly, if there's stress within us, it doesn't matter what environment you put us in, we're going to see stress out there. And so we're going to look at today, how do we put on a different pair of specs so that things just seem that little bit more approachable. And again, it's not airy-fairy positive thinking and assuming that everything's going to be easy. It's going to be difficult when we go out there. Comment coming through there. Nearly all the biggest mistakes I've made in life were caused by getting into reactive state. And I'm sure we all resonate with that. That's why they tell us to sleep on our problems and to take a breath. And again, I think compassion is important, and recognizing when we do get reactive. Okay, what happened there? Okay, I've been going very fast paced. I've been taking on a lot recently. Maybe I need to reconsider that. Maybe I need to give myself a bit more space so I don't put myself in these states again. But this first recognition, I hope this makes sense as a first recognition. It's important that on a daily basis, we put the foot on the brake. Maybe I speak for myself, but I'm sure other people will relate, or at least some people will relate. When I was younger, I was convinced I'm different. I can multitask. I can go a million miles an hour. And I really identified with being a hard worker, being someone who got a lot done. And our identity, the way we see ourselves, can at some point, it's like they say, all medicine becomes poison at a certain point. If you start seeing yourself as someone who's a producer and someone who gets things done, and that's great and everything else, but sometimes that involves me having my foot on the accelerator, or you having your foot on the accelerator and asking too much of yourself. Okay, let's individually, if there's any questions at any point, please don't be shy. Hopefully I'll get to as many as possible. There was a question about spiritual health. What is spiritual health earlier? I'll get into that in just a minute. So 4, am I talking too fast, or are we okay? Speaking for companies out in Europe last week, they were saying, Pat, you're going to have to slow it down. Okay, cool. Lots to get through. So let's look at the four energies. My encouragement with this and any session you attend this week, or any sessions in general, is that a lot of us have that black and white thinking. We have that thinking of, I want to create some change. And so we try to take on too much too quick. And so my encouragement is always small steps. So if you hear one thing today and you can apply that one thing, I think that'll be really useful. That's where our confidence comes from. We take one thing, we use it, we see the improvements, and we grow. And then we get confidence and we add a little more, add a little more. So take one thing if you can today. Physical. We're going to talk about physical briefly. We'll talk about mental, we'll talk about emotional, and we'll talk about spiritual. Just to give context to each of these, physical relates to the amount of physical energy that I have. The amount of physical energy. So my quantity of energy, if you will. Someone who's sick won't have much physical energy. Someone who's an athlete maybe will have a lot of physical energy. So we're looking at our physical energy. Very hard to go and do things in life if I'm lacking that energy and I feel a bit flat. So we'll talk about how do we improve our physical energy. We'll look at mental energy. So this is my focus, my ability to manage my internal talk, my dialogue internally, and also my ability to be present with whatever I'm doing. So when I'm with my kids, can I be fully present with my kids? When I'm at work, can I be fully present at work? I think if this was the one tool. I know there was a session yesterday on focus and attention. And so we'll talk about that. Emotional. To me, emotional is about resilience. I used to think resilience was being tough and being nitty gritty and being almost soldier-like. Now I see resilience as actually being about being willing to be with my different emotions, not being a fair weather friend to myself, not just liking myself when I'm on top form, but also working with myself and being kind and compassionate and learning from my difficult emotions, seeing them as feedback. Finally, spiritual. To me, spiritual relates to meaning and purpose. It seems a little bit fluffy in some environments, that word of spiritual, but it's probably the most important. My meaning and purpose. Why do I do what I do? You think about, one of the reasons I came to this work was, again, my own mental health struggles, and even seeing young lads in Galway and all over the world, men and women all over the world that are struggling with mental health. That meaning and purpose thing disappears. I forget like that life just becomes heavy, and I forget why I do what I do. On a smaller level, maybe I get disillusioned with work and I start questioning what's the point. So if we can tap back into meaning and purpose, it can have a big impact on our lives. So to give a really brief, I wish I had more time. The time flies by. I hope it's the same for people listening as it is for me. What this might look like in a practical sense. I've got a friend called Jerry Duffy. Jerry's a phenomenal speaker and an endurance athlete. Jerry did 32 marathons in 32 days across 32 counties, which is kind of wild if you think about it. 32 marathons, 32 days, 32 counties. The reason I tell Jerry's story is to look at what this might look like on a big sense, and then we can think about what it looks like on a day-to-day sense. For someone to do 32 marathons, 32 days, 32 counties, it's very obvious that they need physical energy. He needs to train a lot. He needs to have the capacity in the tank. He needs to be able to physically show up every day. So that's the obvious one. What maybe we wouldn't see on the surface is he also needs mental energy. You can't be on your first day of a 32 marathon challenge stressing about day 10. You've got to stay present to what you're doing. You've got to stay focused on what you're doing. And how often in life do we get pulled by our mind into the future that takes us away from the magic of what's happening now? or takes us away, brings us into fear because we're living too far ahead. So Jerry needed that focus, that mental energy. Also needed to be able to manage his internal talk. So when the negative thoughts come up, can Jerry talk to himself in a positive and empowering way? Emotional energy. Jerry needed emotional energy when things didn't go to plan. So this is, again, the resilience and adaptability. When he gets stress fractures in his foot and he's been planning this thing for a year and suddenly now he's injured, or logistically things don't go to plan, or his training partners don't show up, or whatever it might be, how does he deal with that? So that's the emotional piece. But the most interesting piece is when Jerry's physically exhausted throughout those 32 days and he's mentally fatigued and his mind's all over the place, and emotionally he feels like throwing in the towel, he's just completely overwhelmed, he can fall back on spiritual. And we all see evidence of this. If you ever go to the streets of Galway race, or you go to any race all over the world, you'll see 90% of the people taking part in these races tend to have the name of a charity on their top. So this is the spiritual piece to some degree. Why do you do what you do? Generally, it means going beyond ourselves. When we struggle, a lot of the time, we're stuck in our own stuff. We're stuck in our own heads and our own problems and challenges. When we go beyond that, so for Jerry with these 32 marathons, his focus was raising money for charity. It was a big thing, raising money for charity. And so that helped him keep going. That was his reason for being. For us on a more simple level, we might just think about, well, physically, I need the energy to get up and to actually get through my day and get things done and feel like I'm making progress in life. So that's my physical. I need the mental energy so that when challenging thoughts come up and my inner critic comes up, I can actually deal with that inner critic and not let it pull me completely off course. Again, we've all had probably magic moments where we get to a place where we thought this is where I wanted to be, and the voice in my head almost spoils it a little bit. Or we have that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome. Emotional, again, we need this on a day-to-day basis because some days we wake up and we just don't feel good. And it can be easy to kind of beat ourselves up about that, but it can be more effective to actually work with these pieces. And again, we need this spiritual piece. Why do I do what I do? Is it to support my family? Is it to give my family something I never had? Am I in a job at the moment that I don't like? But if I can tap into the spiritual piece and I can say, this is actually allowing me to put a bit of money aside to do a course that I love, that starts to change my whole outlook on life. Okay, now blitzing through bits. Let's start with physical. Again, coming from working in the fitness industry for 10 years, the number one factor that I found that has the biggest impact on people's physical energy and physical health is sleep. It's not sexy, but it's the most important factor, sleep. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I think it'll be relatively self-explanatory. But I talk about that stress hormone, okay, the importance of the stress hormone. So again, the stress hormone, cortisol, gets us up, gets us moving, has a lot of benefit with it. We naturally, our sleep cycle, which is called circadian rhythm, operated in such a way, again, caveman, cavewoman days, we think about that. We've got the caveman, cavewoman brain in the modern world. The way this will naturally have operated over the years was in the morning, as the sun was coming up, our stress level starts to come up to get us up and get us moving. So that gets us up in the morning. We go out, we go about our day, it starts to even off throughout the day, and then that stress hormone starts to drop down in the evening, which allows us to come into rest and digest and produce the hormones that we need to go to sleep. So this is the natural sleep cycle. This would have happened for thousands of years. Now, modern day, this has changed slightly because the stress hormone comes up in the morning, but it doesn't go down the same way because, again, the chronic stress we're experiencing throughout the day. So again, back in the day, there was a short period of stress. We used the energy. Okay, so we had the fight or flight. We either fight the threat or we run away, and then that disappears. Modern day is chronic. You get stuck in traffic, I feel stressed. My boss says something to me, I feel stressed. I see something on social media I don't like, I feel stressed. So it's chronically happening. And so this stress level is sometimes not dropping down. And again, a lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar, a lot of environmental factors, overthinking, worrying, trying to juggle too many different things can leave me in a place where I go to bed and I'm tired, but I'm wired. Tired, but wired. So I'm kind of tossing and turning. So let me provide 3 quick suggestions that might be useful for anyone who struggles with sleep. Actually, if you're comfortable, you might share in the chat box, scale of 1 to 10. 10 being I sleep like a baby, 1 being maybe I have a baby in the house and I don't sleep. How are you currently feeling with sleep? 10s, 2s, 3s, 5s, 8s. Okay, so lots of lower numbers, which again is a great opportunity. And a couple of 9s and 10s. I'm always jealous of the 9s and 10s. I don't want their secrets. Okay, cool. So here's 3 quick suggestions. Again, I know I'm zipping through a few bits here, so if there's anything I talk about that you'd like more context on or information, I'll provide my email at the end. So 3 things that are really useful for sleep. The first is brain dump. brain dump. So neuroscientists will say that for most of us, we tend to have about 200 cognitive loops open at any given time. Now, what that means is, I just told you guys that maybe I'll follow up with additional resources after the session. When I tell you that, I've opened a cognitive loop. I've opened a problem in my mind that I need to solve, okay, and a problem that I need to solve. Me bringing out my bins out on a Sunday night, that's another problem. That's another loop that's open in my mind. Promising someone I'll email them back is another loop. There's all these different loops that are open in our mind. And again, neuroscientists will suggest we have about 200 of these open loops at any given time. By closing these loops, we find a level of completion. So oftentimes we find ourselves in bed, tossing and turning, and we start thinking, oh, I forgot to send that email, or oh, I forgot to put out the bins, or whatever it might be. These are open loops that are running somewhere in the background. And so the first suggestion for sleep is, if I can have pen and paper at my bedside, and I can take my pen and paper, and I can just get any thoughts that are on my mind onto paper before I go to sleep, this can be really useful, just to close out some of those problems that we haven't yet solved. And it could just be to put things down that I'm going to get done tomorrow. It could be to write down some of the things I've achieved today. It could be just to write down some of the noise that's in my mind. I always find that things can happen and they can be quite innocent in what happens, but then we put them in our mind and we make them more dramatic than they might otherwise be. So again, a colleague might say something to me. It's relatively innocent, but then it goes up in my mind and I replay it 100 times and I add more and more emotion to it. Pen and paper tends to take away some of that emotion that can be overwhelming, and it tends to make things a bit more practical. So the first part of this strategy is pen and paper at night. Can I write down some of the things that are on my mind to just clear out my mind a little bit before I go to sleep? The second piece of this is no technology. This is the challenging bit. No technology. So for 30 minutes before I go to sleep, can I remove technology from my bedroom? The idea with this is very simple but not easy. Again, natural sleep cycle. Sun comes up, we get up. Sun goes down, we go down. Modern day, if I'm looking at a bright screen at 11 o'clock at night, as far as my old brain is concerned, it's still daytime. So this bright screen is like the sun to me. And so it's very hard to sleep. Okay, so for 30 minutes before bed, can I allow myself, question there, does a Kindle count as technology? I always read in bed. My understanding is the Kindle doesn't have the blue light coming from it, so I think Kindle is good to go. So for 30 minutes before bed, can I remove the technology? Again, sending that signal to the body and mind, it's time to wind down. If we think about anyone that's got kids, generally you'll have a bedtime routine for your kids. They start to wind down. They start to slow down the car. So maybe you read them a bedtime story, you help them brush their teeth. Things start to slow down. But maybe for us, then we're watching like a horror film on Netflix, and then we fall into bed and we try to sleep, and there's a lot going on. And so, no technology for 30 minutes. I get my thoughts on paper. And the final bit of this, which we'll try now real time, is the box breath. The box breath. People familiar with the box breath? Quick yes or a no in the chat box. Lots of yeses and lots of no's. Okay, so the box breath. Okay, we'll do a couple of these. It's nice to do it real time. So the box breath is probably the simplest way, one of the simplest ways. The breath in general is one of the simplest ways of telling the body and mind that we're relaxed and we're calm. I share this with a lot of teenagers in particular, and I tell them you have to trust the breath. So the last thing in the world we want to do sometimes when we feel stressed is press pause and take a couple of breaths. It's funny, I work with different types of companies, and there's certain companies where when I suggest we're about to do a box breath, I just see the numbers dropping. I just see people dropping, and I can imagine the narrative is, I don't have time to breathe. But it's amazing the difference 2 to 3 minutes of this can make. So if we think about what we look like when we're stressed in terms of physiology, stress, we tend to breathe into our chest. We tend to breathe quite shallow, and we tend to breathe quite fast. So fast, shallow, and into the chest. And then if we think about what a calm breath looks like, we can say it's through the nose, it's slow, and it's deep into the belly. So two very different things. So with that in mind, what we might start thinking of doing is, can we reverse engineer the breath? Can we slow the breath down so that we send a signal to the body and mind that we're relaxed and we're calm and we're not under threat? Okay, so we're slowing things down. So the box breath is called the box breath because it's got 4 parts and they're all equal, like a box. Each part is the same. It's 4 seconds long. So what I mean by that is I breathe in for 4 seconds and then I hold for 4 seconds. I breathe in for 4 and I hold for 4. Then I breathe out for 4 and I hold for 4. So this is a box. That's one breath, 16 seconds. A couple of these only takes 1 to 2 minutes. And even that, we're going to do it now in just a second. The secret here is we want to breathe through our nose. Again, signs of relaxed breathing. It's through the nose. It's easy. It's effortless. It's slow. It's into the belly. Signs of stressful breathing. It tends to be fast into the chest. It tends to be shallow. It tends to be difficult. And sometimes when we're told to take a deep breath, you'll notice people go, and we don't get any breath in at all. Some people would suggest we only use about 20% of our lung function because the breath tends to be quite shallow. And it's like a vicious cycle, because when my mind thinks that I'm stressed, it sends a signal to the body that I'm stressed, and my breath becomes shorter. And then when my breath becomes shorter, a signal goes to my mind to say I'm under threat, and it just becomes a cycle. And so by slowing things down, we can catch that cycle and break that cycle. So let's give it a go real quick, if you're up for joining me on this, provided you're not driving or doing anything wild. If you place a hand on your belly and a hand on your chest and gently close your eyes. So one hand on belly, one hand on chest, gently closing the eyes, and just notice where the breath is before we even start, without having to change anything. So maybe you notice the breath is already deep into the belly, or maybe it's a little bit more shallow. We take 21,000 breaths a day, so we'll have established some habits probably. And what we're going to try to do now is deepen the breath. So I'm going to encourage you to breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, looking to expand your belly. So in for 4. After breathing in for 4, just hold it for 4. 3, 2, 1. Exhale through your nose for 4. And again, hold for 4. That's our first box breath. Let's do 3 more. So breathing in through the nose for 4. Hold. Exhale. And hold. Perfect, guys. Let's do 2 more. Feel yourself relax each time. Breathing in through the nose. Hold. Exhale. Feel yourself relax. And hold. One more nice relaxing breath deep into the belly. Hold. Slow exhale. Feel yourself relax. And hold. Okay. So this is 4. And everyone stayed with me. I was looking at the numbers, see what do we drop out. This is 4 short breaths. That was just over a minute. Let me know if there's any subtle difference in how you feel after that breath. So again, we breathe in for 4, we hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. To catch ourselves, again, think of that loop. When I'm stressed, body. Yeah, one thing to note, the most difficult bit that people will experience with that breath is sometimes people will be challenged by the second hold. Good. We see relaxed, we see calmer. My experience is sometimes I wake up in the morning and I feel anxious, and I might tell myself, oh, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. And I spend the day telling myself that. And then I just get worse and worse and worse. Whereas if I can switch it up and I can say, how do I feel? I feel anxious. How would I like to feel? I'd like to feel calm. And then I ask myself, what's one thing I could do to move toward calm? Now, it's not overriding what I feel. It's actually acknowledging how I feel. So I acknowledge how I feel. I don't make it wrong. I ask, how do I feel? I feel anxious. How would I like to feel? I'd like to feel calm. What's one thing I can do to move in that direction? Again, it's not a flick of a switch and not everything's going to be perfect, but I at least take ownership. Again, rather than tell myself for the day that I'm feeling overwhelmed and not do anything about it and feel more overwhelmed, one step. A couple of people saying they moved from the chest to the belly, which is great. Very calming, always good stuff. For anyone that found it challenging, the bit that you most likely find challenging is this final bit, the hold at the end. So again, we breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and then hold for 4. That last bit is difficult for people sometimes, but it becomes easy relatively quickly. Your body just feels a buildup of CO2, which is a little bit different, but we don't need to worry about that. You'll either get used to it or you can skip that bit if you want to skip that bit, and you can breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Yeah, it's that last bit that tends to catch people. Okay, so this is the simple sleep suggestion. Anyone that was feeling they score a little bit lower on sleep, it can have a huge impact. One of the reasons they deprive soldiers of sleep when they join the army is because they want to see how they are when they're reactive. They want to see how they react. So again, they've got this sleep deprivation as part of some of the training, because they know that people make poor decisions when they don't sleep well. They know that people get reactive when they don't sleep well. They know that people are in survival mode when they don't sleep well. They know that everything's more difficult when people don't sleep well. So it's free and it's legal performance enhancing drug. It'll have a huge impact. Again, it's not sexy, but we might consider those three things. Can I get my thoughts on paper? Let go of the technology for the 30 minutes before bed if I can. And the box breath, I'd suggest 5 minutes of that breathing can make a big impact. Everyone still with me? Let me know in the chat box if there's one thing you've heard thus far that's been useful. I can't believe how fast time is getting away from me here. Has there been one thing you've heard that's been useful for you this morning? Anything stand out? More than one. Okay, box breath, brain dump, tired but wired, impact of meditation. Thank you for all the engagement. Store at the bank for the rainy day. All the sleep suggestions, the breathing, all useful, but really enjoying the box breath. Great. And sleep. Let's see. Box breath. Remind yourself the meaning behind what you're doing. Brilliant. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the engagement. I always feel bad. I never thought I'd become a speaker. Now I feel bad when I think back to school and the teacher be asking questions or the lecturers be asking questions, and I would just stand there and say nothing. And now I've been in rooms physically where I'll be like, does this make sense? And just silence. But it's great to have the engagement. Okay. Again, let's touch on mental and spiritual. So we touched on physical. We touched on physical. I also mentioned emotional. So if we think about physical again, there's a couple of suggestions there on sleep. The emotional piece, that breath as a standalone tool will be really useful as well. So 5 minutes twice a day, just doing that breath can have a huge impact on how the rest of your life looks. It helps create that gap. Again, the gap is the magic. Viktor Frankl talked about this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He said between stimulus and response, there is the gap, and the gap is where you have choice. And what that means on a practical sense is I get stressed. My old reaction is I reach for a bottle of wine, and I'm drinking the wine before I even realize it. There was no gap. I didn't recognize the gap. As I start to do this little bit of meditation, even this 5 minutes twice a day, I get stressed, same stress appears, but now I recognize, oh, my pattern is when I'm stressed, I reach for wine. I don't want to do that anymore. Or maybe you do, but now you have choice. But there's a little gap there where you recognize there's a thought, and then there's a gap, and then there's the action. When we're stressed, we forget that there's the gap in between, and we think there's a thought, I need to act on the thought. Okay, moving on to mental and spiritual. If I ever get to speak on this conference again, I'm going to be asking for a half day. Could I do a half day seminar, please? A couple of years ago, I saw this graph and it really impacted how I see my mind. It really helped me feel a little bit more in control of my mind. I've struggled with anxiety. I still do at times. I know language is important. I probably shouldn't say it that way, but I get overwhelmed and I live in my head and I live in the future, and I have the tools now to support me, but I'm still prone to just being that type of person. But CBT has had a big impact on me the last couple of years, cognitive behavioral therapy. And again, I saw it a lot with clients that worked with me for years, that the way people spoke to themselves had the biggest impact on whether they achieve things or not in different areas of life. And so this is the graph from CBT that hopefully resonates with people. CBT, already some fans of CBT in the chat box. CBT tells us that our thoughts have an impact on how we feel. Our thoughts have an impact on how we feel. So a simple example, if my thought is this COVID thing's never going to end and it's going to be the death of my business, I'm going to feel angry, pissed off, agitated, sad. I'm going to feel certain things. If my thought changes to something slightly different, if my thought changes to what's left, what's working, where my opportunities lie, I'm going to feel slightly different. So my thoughts impact how I feel. My feelings impact how I act. When I feel motivated, I tend to act in certain ways. When I feel stressed, I tend to act in other ways. And my actions impact the results that I see in my life. So we all have different results with our health, with our relationships, with our career, with many different aspects of life. To change our results, we've got to change our actions. And this is where a lot of people get caught. Again, I saw it in the fitness industry. Someone might join the gym and feel motivated and say, right, I'm going to change my actions. But they'd struggle to stay consistent with the actions. And then, so the following year, they'd come back and again, they'd approach the actions. there wasn't this recognition of what's going on internally. So again, how I talk to myself impacts how I feel. How I feel impacts how I act, and how I act impacts the results that I see. This becomes a cycle. Really simple example. When I was in school, my story for 6 years was I'm not academic, I'm not clever, I'm not smart. Told myself that for 6 years. Not academic, not clever, not smart. That made me feel overwhelmed and anxious and sad and depressed and angry about school. When I felt those things, I would skip school, or I'd focus on sport, or I would just not make any effort, because we act in line with our identity. If I think I'm not academic, I'm not going to do the things an academic person would do. And so as a result, I would not get good exam results. And then I would find myself pointing to my results and saying, look, I was right. We tend to fight for our limitations. Again, I might have a client who says, I've got bad genetics and I can't lose weight. That would make them feel hopeless when it came to weight loss. The action would be to self-sabotage. The result would be wouldn't lose weight. And then they point their fingers, say, see, look, I can't lose weight. The world tells us that we should be looking at changing our goals, which are our results. So set new goals. And then it says, change your habits, your actions. A big focus. Most books out there are about goals and habits. That's great and everything else, but what they tend to overlook is what's going on inside of us. This is all outside of us. What's going on within me? Well, my thoughts, how I'm talking to myself is going on within me, and my feelings are going on within me. And if I can change how I talk to myself, and I can understand my feelings in a more holistic way, then suddenly the actions piece is easy and the results piece becomes easier. If I change how I see myself, everything changes. So the way I suggest we do this, actually, let's share two more quick things before I go to that. And then I'll share a little workbook at the end that I want to pass on to everyone. There's two biases. There's lots of biases of the mind, but there's two for me that really stand out that I think are really, really important. The first is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. So again, the way the mind operates, we've got this confirmation bias. And we might think of it as an internal algorithm. So the internal algorithm is, if we go on social media and we're interested in certain politicians, it gives us more of the same. It gives us more of what we're interested in. If we're interested in other politicians, it gives us something different. Okay, so we get more of what we're interested in. Similarly, our mind gives us more of what we believe. So if I believe people are unkind, I'll see more unkind people in the world. If I believe I'm not good academically, I'll see where I'm not good academically. We go out and we confirm our biases. So we all have biases based on where we were raised, based on the religion we came into, based on what our parents told us, based on so many different things. And we start to deconstruct, which is a job for another day. We start to deconstruct some of our biases. We can open up to new possibilities. So there's confirmation bias. The second bias is negativity bias. So our mind tends to go to what's missing, what's lacking, what's wrong. When I do one of these sessions, I'll see, oh, there was 150 people on the call, and now there's 149. I'll see the one that's missing. That's how the mind operates. It sees what's missing, what's lacking, what's wrong. It's not because we're negative people, but because that's protective thinking. That's our brain trying to keep us safe by always looking for threats. Again, back to this caveman brain, it's always looking for threats. So when we understand that when this is how our brain operates, and we understand that our thoughts impact the rest of our lives, we can see that it's important that we start to rewrite some of our scripts, some of our beliefs about ourselves. So as we come toward the allotted time, let me know, did that hour go by fast, or is it just me? You could say this is the longest hour of my life. Shortest hour of my life, I think. Shortest hour in recent memory, anyway. So I'm going to pass on. This workbook to everyone, and it takes some of the things we've talked about. So this is how we make it practical. Glad to hear it went by fast for people. This is what I'm going to pass on. 14 days self-awareness challenge. It takes some of the things I've just scratched on today, and putting it into effect. Obviously, is the most important thing. No more than reading a book about fitness is a waste of time. Reading a book about swimming is a waste of time. I need to get in the pool. This stuff needs to be put into practice. So here's how it's kind of explained here, but ultimately what this is a chance every day to first check in with yourself and do your 5 minutes of breathing in the morning and 5 minutes of breathing in the evening. So 5 and 5. Okay, so 5 and 5. And then in the morning, ask yourself a couple of questions. The idea with asking yourself questions is when you ask new questions, you get new answers. Okay, so when I ask myself, what am I grateful for, excited for, what are my priorities, I get new answers. I have to think creatively. And then in the evening, I asked myself some other questions. So I apologize that it's been so rushed and so fast. My fault. I really enjoyed doing this. I appreciate you guys allowing me to do this. I'll pass on this workbook and some other resources, some meditations, a bunch of things, and just reach out if there's anything I can support you on. If there's anything I touched on that was useful for you, my email is just support@patdivilly.com. To close out, just give me one word, if you can, to how you're feeling now. I'd love to hear how you're feeling at the end of this session. Motivated, positive, inspired, motivated, enthused, optimistic, motivated. Okay, brilliant, guys. Thank you all. I'm going to go for a swim down at Silver Strand. Again, reach out if you need anything. Look after yourselves. Thank you for your time and your attention. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll speak to you all soon.